morning has really gotten away from me. Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Been a little bit chaotic this morning. We ended up having some internet issues with our building today, so we're back up and running though. We're going to be functioning, and you're here for this training. Excellent. All right. So good morning, everyone. We are going to be discussing Transaction Desk today. And before we get started with the webinar content itself, I did want to run through just a couple basics about what we're going to be discussing. And that way we can dive right into the course content itself. I do see that we have a call-in listener today. It's fine to use that for your audio if you guys do end up needing to, have a separate speaker. I will not be able to give you CE credit if you're only listening to the webinar, but again, I understand there's all sorts of situations. I've had people participate where they're watching on a screen and have their phone on speakerphone next to them, so it's whatever, but just a heads up. Oh, it literally doesn't show me who the caller is. It just has a phone number. I would have to look up the phone number to find out. But yeah, it's no worries. As long as you can see the screen, you'll be getting credit. Oh, no worries. Thanks, Brittany. So I wanted to let you guys know you're all going to be muted by default. We do have a Q&A button that's going to allow you guys to ask any questions if you have any. I wanted to mention as well that if you do end up deciding to ask a question, please make sure that you put that in Q&A. The Q&A option is going to be where I actually get notified if there's a question that's been posted. The chat, on the other hand, isn't quite so noticeable. I mean, unless I'm looking at it, it's really not going to make any commotion. So chat, on the other hand, is going to be where you guys can post any commentary you would like to add, anecdotes, etc. So this session will be recorded. A link is actually going to be sent to you guys after class is over. Just let me know if you guys end up having any audio or video issues. Just as a reminder, if you guys end up having an audio or video issue, you can hit me up in the chat, Q&A, hit the raise hand button, whatever. But worst case scenario, if you can't communicate with me at all, get in contact with us over at the service desk. They've got some people waiting so that if you do end up having any issues, we can troubleshoot that as quickly as possible. All that to say, I really don't want you guys to miss out on any CE credit. And just a heads up, because this is actually news this month, we actually have gotten all of our classes, every class that we teach on the MLS side of things is now a CE credit class. There's only a couple that are actually going to be hot CE, or I think it's HOT, hot, I don't know. It's all capitals as far as how they stylize it. But almost everything else, like this class today, is going to be an elective CE credit. But we should be fine with that. And Sherry, yeah, no worries. As long as you're not missing out on more than like 5 or 10 minutes of class, depending on when it happens to be, we're fine. All right. So I also wanted to mention some of the buttons down at the very bottom of the screen. Again, chat for commentary, Q&A for any questions. And I wanted to mention, if you guys end up wanting to get unmuted, maybe your question is too long or you're wanting to make a comment really quickly, you can hit that raise hand button, and I'll just assume that that means that you have a question you would like to ask with your voice. Now we'll get you unmuted and you can ask a question. We can go ahead and answer that. For those of you guys who are joining us on a mobile device, I did want to point out the buttons are going to be in a little bit different arrangement, but in order to even see them, you need to tap the screen in order to view it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Move this out of the way. Oh, and actually, let me reset this just a little bit. Kind of a little bit of a spoiler here, but so just so you guys are aware, today we're going to be discussing the Transaction Desk system. Transaction Desk is, in fact, actually a member benefit that you guys have access to. This is going to allow you guys to do paperless transactions, meaning you guys can actually run through the process of getting forms filled out, sending them off to clients, getting them digitally signed, and then those can be used as legally binding documents. So it used to be that this was kind of a frowned upon thing. And I've actually heard in the past that there were some lenders who were not particularly as fond of the digitally signed things. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's been a really bad, deadly pandemic going on for a while where everybody was kind of staying away from each other. And we got a bunch of digital signings that were being done because that was the only safe way to do it. So most lenders at this point have actually gotten to where they just see that it's been signed, whether it's digital or not. And as long as there's the proper documentation on those documents, those will be valid. So I'm actually kind of glad for that because we have had some issues before and no longer have to worry about it. So we're going to be getting started in the transaction desk system. There's two different ways for us to get into that system. There is a link right here on the MLS portal. So immediately after you guys get signed in, just as a reminder, go to mlstechnology.com to get signed in. The only reason I mention that is because we are going to be redoing our website soon. So instead of going to tulsarealtors.com and then clicking on that realtor login, what I'd recommend is just going directly to mlstechnology.com. Also, if you guys are signed into Matrix already and you guys want to just quickly jump over to Transaction Desk, instead of having to go back to your portal, there is a link right here on the external links widget. This can be anywhere on your screen, so just a heads up. It can move around, or you may have closed it out and it's under the additional section, but it's always going to be there if you need it. And in fact, it's one of the first things that we're going to be talking about in Transaction Desk is how to correct your homepage. So this homepage that we have here, when you first get signed into Transaction Desk, is going to have some navigation buttons over here on the left-hand side. The navigation that we see over here on the left can be accessed in full with this little menu button up at the top, little hamburger icon. This also shows the full name of the product that we're in. So it used to be that this was simply called Transaction Desk. Now it is Transactions Transaction Desk Edition. Just as a heads up, ZipForm also has been renamed. They're both owned by the same company now, both owned by Lone Wolf. ZipForm, who was previously ZipLogic, is now called Transactions ZipForm Edition. I don't know why. I don't know what exactly is going on there and what's going to happen with ZipForm in the future, but my hope is that at some point, Lone Wolf is actually going to merge those two products together and hopefully make something cohesive, and functional, hopefully usable. But in the interim, when you guys first get into Transaction Desk and you need to navigate around, there's going to be the navigation options over here on the left-hand side. These are going to stay with us for the rest of wherever we are in this system until we get to a signing. So if you ever need to jump to a specific transaction or check on any of your signings or go to a specific form, all of those can be found over on the left. Just remember, left-hand side is going to be for the entire system. That'll come back a little bit later. Now, when we first land in Transaction Desk, we're going to be starting off on this little odometer icon, the dashboard. At the moment, I have myself signed in on the agent dashboard. If you are in your system and it's showing you broker dashboard instead, there's going to be a little icon over here next to the question mark and the padlock that's going to allow you to switch over to the agent view. That'll switch between whether or not you're viewing everything as the broker, which allows you access to other agents, listings, etc. within your office. If you switch over to the agent dashboard, though, this is going to be transactions you're creating for yourself. So I also wanted to mention, while we're on this home page, since it's obviously fairly simple and kind of a launch pad for wherever else you're going to be going, there is some customization that you can do to this. So just like we see in Matrix, where we can kind of move things around, and adjust where things are located to kind of meet how we want to use the system, Transaction Desk does the same thing with one major difference. With the Matrix system, you can just move things around. If you guys notice, I can't move any of these around right now. They're all locked in place. So I need to click on that little padlock icon at the top right corner, and this will pull up a tray of all of the items that I either have on my screen. So create, upload, create, upload. All of those are already on my screen. And then I've got a bunch of lists that are going to appear here. We've got our transactions, we've got our checklists, we've got our recent signings, and we've got our forms. Now, if we end up getting rid of one of these by just clicking the little X icon, you'll notice that that green icon is now available. So this is indicating that I can actually drag that and drop it onto my screen. Now, in addition to dragging and dropping from the tray, we also have the ability to move things around on the screen as well. So for instance, if I liked to have all of my buttons up at the top and maybe move my transactions down, I can move that to a different position. Move this out of the way. There we go. Move that over here. Maybe move my signing stuff over. Try and squeeze more information onto my screen all at once. So there's a variety of different ways that you guys can rearrange this if you would like. My suggestion would be to always make sure that you have at least 2 of these items. So I think that 2 of the most important things that you guys need to have available to you are going to be the transactions list and the authentisign list. So this is going to be transactions and then this recent button. Now, the reason I think that is because on the transactions list, it's going to give you quick and easy access to anything that you had already created. This list is actually going to have them sorted by whatever you modified most recently. So for instance, I just created this transaction yesterday. It's at the top of my list. This one was created earlier, so on and so forth. And it'll just be a list of all of your most recent listings, or your most recent transactions, I should say. Now, you also have access to the transactions with this home icon, but that home icon isn't going to show any of your signings. So that's the other reason why I think the signings should be another option that you leave on your main screen, is because this is going to allow you to see where any of your signings are in process. So if I had sent off a signing for this Wilson one, I can see I've got one here, the listing agreement. We've got another one where we had to restart the signing, and it's put in under a draft. We also have another one here that's been rejected, and I can see all of that from my home page without having to go into each of the transactions themselves. There are other options on here, and I would suggest that you guys actually take a look at this at your leisure just to find out which parts and pieces might be beneficial to you. And again, try to prioritize your screen real estate by putting the things on the screen that are actually going to make the most sense to you. So if you guys are frequently just jumping into transaction desk and then diving directly into a transaction, this list is beneficial. If you're just trying to check on the status of the signing, you can do that from your home page. So I'm going to lock my screen back down with that padlock again. You notice the texture up at the top is gone. There's no X's to close out of things. Everything has been locked back down, so I don't have to worry about accidentally moving anything. All right, so that's it for our home page. So what the rest of the class is going to be revolving around for the most part is going to be oh goodness. Yeah, thank you. Robert just reminded me of something important that we need to do, and I completely forgot about that. Did I mention yet that today's been a little chaotic already? Let's actually do our poll before we get into the more practical stuff. Just as a heads up, this is going to be used to justify the CE credit for the class. So I need everybody to participate in the poll. I should end up with 14 people, I think. But yeah, thank you, Robert. I don't know what I'd do without you guys. Which is funny because I hear the same thing to me. All right, excellent. I think we got everybody in there. Go ahead and close up the poll. And let's share these results real quick, because actually this is going to be beneficial for you guys to know. I'm going to also use this to kind of curate how we're going to be discussing things today. So I see that we've actually got a decent amount of people, more than half the class, that's actually either new or relatively new to real estate. Welcome. I'm going to try and make sure that we contextualize some of the functions that we're going to be discussing today, so that if you guys are literally brand new, or if you guys have been around the block for a while, but things are still fresh, We'll try and make sure that you understand why we would be doing the certain things that we're going to be discussing. It also looks like a decent amount of you guys, a majority, thankfully, have actually either used Transaction Desk or have used similar systems. We've got a couple people with ZipForm, a few people with .loop and DocuSign. I do have one note about .loop and one of the differences that Transaction Desk has to it, so I'll mention that a little bit later as well. All right, go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you guys for that. So we're going to be discussing during class today the transaction creation process. Now, part of the reason why we stress this particular process while we're discussing Transaction Desk is because this is the most common thing that we end up getting phone calls about. So let's take, for instance, whenever you guys are first creating a transaction, I've referred to it a couple times here where we have transaction, transaction, transaction. For those of you guys who are using .loop, it might be referred to as a loop. So effectively, what a transaction actually is and how you guys are going to be using this is the transaction is effectively a folder. Now that folder is going to end up containing any of the forms that we need to fill out, any of the documents that we've already scanned, the details about any of the listings, the contact information for the people involved. All of that is going to be kept in one place, and that's called a transaction. So in order for us to start filling things out, getting things signed, it would be best for us to create a transaction to do so. There's possibilities of getting things created without any of that. Just as a very, very strong suggestion, I do not recommend creating standalone forms. I do not recommend creating standalone signings. They can get a little bit confusing. And then, of course, they're also not going to be connected to anything. So there's not going to be data imports or blah, 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 a bunch of stuff. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So the first thing that we need to do in order to actually get this started is hit this Create Transaction button. Again, a nice big button on our main screen. And when we get in here, it's only going to require one thing, and that's just the name. Now, I do have some recommendations for how you guys should be naming things. It's not particularly that important if you guys don't want to follow this particular layout, but what I usually recommend to people is to have the last name of the people that you're involved with, and then to have the address of the property that you're going to be working with. Now, the reason being, the last name is important just because then that way you know who it was that you're going to be interacting with. It's also going to prevent you from having to worry about if they end up being a buyer and a seller. I can have one transaction going for their selling of their property, and then I can have another transaction going for the buying of the property. If I just put in their name, I'm not going to remember which one is which. If I just put in the address, I might forget who it is that I'm actually working with, because I don't know about you guys, but sometimes those numbers and street names kind of all blur together after a while. So we're going to leave it at that. That's my recommendation for your naming. Again, you can name it whatever you want, though. So this is a completely open-ended field. Name it whatever is going to make sense to you. Now, you may end up noticing that there's going to be a section here for templates. If you do not, that's perfectly fine. If you don't see a section here for templates, that just means that you don't have any created and your office hasn't made any for you either. We'll be talking about how to create templates at the end of class. The next section here is going to be the type. The type is actually something we are going to be filling in today. Right now I have it on none, but let's notice that we have a couple commercial options, a couple condo, residential, and vacant land options. All of these are actually going to define how this particular transaction is constructed. And one of the first things that it's actually going to do whenever we choose what the type is actually going to be changing the add me as the from either neither to a listing agent, selling agent, or you guys can always manually check yourself as both. So when I choose my type, the type that we're going to be doing for our example today is actually a residential listing. So I'm going to choose residential listing here. And notice as me as the has now added me as the listing agent. So now I don't have to worry about manually adding that in. It's going to automatically grab my information and my office's information to ensure that any of the paperwork that needs to know who the listing agent is will automatically add me as that listing agent. So we can also switch this again. So if I'm doing a residential listing, I'm also going to be representing the buyer's side because I've already got a buyer set up. I can switch that over to both manually. Now, there's also a section here for importing data. One of the good things about Transaction Desk is that it allows us to import either from the MLS, which means that I have to have an MLS number to put in, or we'll have to use the realist tax information. Now, the realist tax information side of things is going to be a little bit different. It's going to require you to put in what county you're going to be searching in, and then it's going to require the tax ID. Now, an important note about the tax ID is that when you're having it request a tax ID or parcel number or tax parcel, or, I mean, there's a variety of different ways that each county and system is actually going to refer to things. It's actually looking for a very specific piece of data. When you guys are signed in to Realist, there's going to be a section here, let me zoom this back in, that says tax information, and there's going to be a field under there called tax parcel. So if I were to grab this exact parcel number and import that into my transaction, that's actually going to allow me to pull over any of the details that I can from the tax records themselves. So what the address is, who the owner is, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, et cetera, et cetera. All of that information can be imported over so that you don't have to manually fill all of that out yourself. There's also a search function over here. So if you guys don't have this particular number in hand, that's perfectly fine. You can also click this little magnifying glass to just stay within Transaction Desk and then run your search from here. So if I wanted to, I could do 373, Riverside, Tulsa. Oh, and I need to also define the county, search tax data, and here we go. I got the same thing again, check the checkbox, select, and I'd be good to go. So no having to worry about the tax ID if I didn't have it in hand, just click that little magnifying glass. But I'm going to leave mine with a blank setup. For our example today, I'm not going to be importing or doing anything else. We're just going to leave it at that. So I'm going to hit this create button up at the top. I'm going to point out, I did not discuss this use wizard thing. I always recommend leaving that since that's the default option. And it's also what we're going to be going through today. So when you first start off in the wizard, it's going to start you off on step 1, which is the details. Notice there are 5 steps to this process. It's all very simple stuff. Everything's going to be kind of piecemeal. We want to make sure that we get everything listed out. So first and foremost, I need to start putting in my address for the property. Go. Let's do Eufaula. I like Eufaula. Never mind, I forgot what county Eufaula is in. We're going to do Tulsa. There we go. All right, so I got some basic information in here. I'm only going to be filling out just a little bit of this. Obviously, there's a whole bunch more stuff that we can fill out, but I'm actually just going to leave it with the basic information here so that you guys can see it autofill a little bit later. Now, this right-hand column actually starts off with something that's been filled in by the system. So notice the residential listing was automatically filled because of how we created the transaction. The transaction status was not something we had any control over. It just has open. When I click on this transaction status, you're going to notice some familiar statuses from the MLS. We've got active, pending, closed, withdrawn, expired, and then there's also this extra one that's closed, file complete. But this open status is effectively a limbo state before any of the rest of these apply. So when you guys are first going through the process of adding any listing into the system, it doesn't have an active status. It doesn't have an MLS number. So we leave it in this open status until it's finally ready to be connected to a listing. And then we can change that over to the status. And then we can also put in the MLS number. I'm going to put in just something basic here for our legal description. Just copy some text in here so we have something in there. Perfect. All right. And then down here towards the bottom, we also have our listing information. At this point, there's a chance that we don't have a listing price yet, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a list price for now. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh, I need one more 0. There we go. Got a $1 billion property. It's going to be great. I'm going to retire off the commission on this one. So I got my details all filled out, ready to go. What's the next step? Next. Nice and easy. Oh, actually, we got a question about the last page. Will entering the MLS number on the right side auto-populate anything? It will not. And in fact, actually, that would have been something we would have had to have done from that previous screen when we hit create transaction. There it would have provided us with a spot to import the data over from an MLS that already exists. If we do end up needing to come back, so like after I've got the listing created and add the MLS number, it's not going to import any extra data over, because it'll assume that, at least in part, this information that you used here was actually what was used to create the transaction, or the create the listing, excuse me. But that's a good question. This does actually get locked down after a while. So if you do end up having a listing that was imported, you may end up not being able to change this. There's a process to fix that, but you guys can give us a call if you have a question about it. Not a very common issue, thankfully. All right, so we're done with details. We're going to hit next and bring us over to the transaction dates section. When we're on the transaction dates, it's just a couple basic things on here. The only thing that I'm going to be filling out is our list date. Put it in for today, put in our expiration date for tomorrow. Here today, gone tomorrow. All right, got that all filled out. Again, there's more options on here. I don't need any of them right now. So I'm going to hit next. This brings us to our contacts page. Now the contacts page is very simple. So far, it's only added in my office and myself. If I need to add anybody else, there's a nice big button up at the top here that says add. When we click on that, it's going to give us a couple options that are very basic. We got an option to just create a brand new contact for right here. We've got an add existing contact, which allows us to pull from our address book for other transactions that we've used in the past. We've also got the add yourself option, which again, I'm already in here. And then there's also the option for those of you guys with Gmail accounts to add a contact from Google. So I'm going to just start off with the create new transaction. Now, what this is providing me with is actually just some basic contact information, as well as the preferences for what their signature should be or what their initial should be. Up here at the top, though, we also have a section for address. When I go to the address option, just, again, basic contact information. So I'm going to choose my type up here. The type is one of the very few required fields besides the first and last name. But when I choose my type, I'm just going to put in my seller. I'm going to put in a first name, George Washington. There we go. And I'm going to put in an email address. Now, it does not require the email address to be added in here, but just in case you guys are, going through the process of creating a excuse me for just a second. Okay. Let's close that out. I apologize. Coworkers are still trying to reach me, and I'm like, hey, I'm in the middle of something. Okay, so we've got an email address put in here. It's not a required field, and I wanted to point out that even though it may not be required, if you are planning on sending out a digital signing to people, think of this as a required field right now. So rather than waiting until later, you've got a contact in the system, and then you try to send off a signing and realize that you did not add your email address, it's going to be a little bit more of a pain to have to add it after the fact. So just make sure that if you guys have already gotten your contact information from your client, put it in here right at the start. It's going to save you some trouble in the long run. Now, we also have a couple extra fields on here. We've got a legal name, preferred signature, and preferred initials. The legal name is actually where you can put in if this was George and you want it to go by Georgie, or Robert and you want it to go by Bob, or whatever the case may be. The legal name can be whatever the official terminology should be on the paperwork, and then the preferred signature could say Bob or whatever the case may be. The legal name is also a good spot for you to put in any of the company's names or trusts or any group that's going to be responsible. So for instance, if George is going to be signing for Washington Construction, that's going to allow us to make sure that all of the paperwork shows George Washington as the name that's actually going to be buying the property. And then when it comes to the signature portion, it's going to automatically use the first and last name, or whatever the preferred signature is. Also wanted to point out the preferred initials might be something you may want to fill out if you do have people that have a first initial and last initial that are the same thing. So for instance, if George was married to somebody named Gina, we probably want to make sure that the preferred initials include their middle initial as well. All right, so clear that out. And we'll go ahead and save this. Oh, actually, I almost forgot one step. So we've chosen him as a seller. I'm going to go back to my address tab. And remember, when we first got into this address tab before we chose his role, this was just basic contact information, and there was not a checkbox up here at the top for the same as property address. Whenever we chose him as a seller, it added this box in here because it knows that if this is a seller, it's probably going to be the same as the property address from the details we've already filled out. So when I check this checkbox, it automatically dumps in some of that information so that whenever some of the forms are asking for what the seller's address is, so not the property in question, but the seller's address, it's going to be looking at this piece of information. We also have the option to put in a cell phone, phone, and fax number. So I'm going to save that. We're going to add in George's wife as well. So I'm going to do add again, create new transaction contact, add her as a seller, Martha, Washington. Perfect. Now, I'm going to point this out just because there are a couple people here that use .loop or have used .loop. The email address in Transaction Desk can be the same for two separate contacts. It's perfectly acceptable in Transaction Desk to do so. There is going to be an option when we get to the signing to actually include a signing PIN. Now, the signing PIN is actually going to allow us to ensure that whenever we deliver the signing information over to the client, they'll have to put in a PIN that you gave them either by text message or over the phone or whatever the case may be. They'll have to put that PIN in order to make sure that they're the ones that are signing for that person's signing. I'll show you guys where to do that later. But if you do end up having a client that has the same email because it's an older couple or like I've a bunch of people that I knew at ORU that got married, now they share email addresses and Facebook accounts, Instagrams. If they're sharing any of that stuff, it's perfectly fine as far as Transaction Desk sees it. People don't have to create a new email address just to do a signing. All right, so I've got both of them added. That's everything I need for here. So I'm going to hit next. When we get to step 4, which is our forms, we're actually going to be provided with a bunch of pre-filled, automatically created forms that are already ready to be filled out. There's going to be a difference between what we're working with in forms and what our last step is, which is documents. The forms are going to be something that the system allows us to add details to by default. So there's going to be spaces for us to fill out information. There's going to be spaces on those forms that'll pull data from our contact information, from our transaction dates, and from our details. So those forms on step 4 are going to be the system default options. These are the forms that we've already created for you. Meanwhile, the last step, documents, is actually going to allow us to upload anything that's already been scanned, images, PDFs, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets. I mean, pretty much anything that you guys could want that's a document can be uploaded in there, but it's not going to allow you to automatically fill those out. We can do that during the signing. I'll show you guys that in a bit. So on step 4, we're going to go to Forms and click Add. This is going to present us with our system folders. Most of these folders are actually going to be categorized by whatever association they were a part of. So for instance, we've got Ada up here at the top. We've got Bartlesville. We've got a bunch of generic ones. Then there's a bunch for SOAR, one for SOBR, and also one for Texoma. So this should mean that if you guys are not part of any of those associations, probably don't have to worry about them. If you're in SOAR, you don't have to worry about Ada. If you're in Ada, you don't have to worry about SOAR, etc. The main ones that you guys should be focused on, though, are going to be these 5 right here in the middle: commercial, membership, MLS, property, residential. These are going to be the generic ones. We are going to be recategorizing this in very, very near future. It's actually a project I'm working on, so that this is going to make a little bit more sense. One of the main things that we have right now is that a lot of the GTAR forms are mixed in with the generic options, along with a bunch of the OREC forms, which happen to have duplicates in a bunch of different places. Anyway, whenever we get into one of these folders, you'll notice that there are a lot of items in here. Again, most of them should have labels indicating where they are originating from. So like, for instance, all of our OREC forms should have OREC listed on them. But I wanted to point out these lists are also massive. So trying to find, let's say, the lead-based paint disclosure. Well, I'm here in the section where it's supposed to show L's and I don't see them. It's always best to just use this search function up here at the top. So if you guys are trying to find the, let's say, exclusive right to sell, type in exclusive. And this actually provides me a list of all of the forms that include the word exclusive in the name. And underneath each of the forms, it's also going to show us what folder that happens to be contained within. So for instance, if I'm just looking for the absolute most basic exclusive right to sell, I'm looking for the generic OREC one. This happens to be the right one, but I'm going to actually scroll down to where I find the residential contracts and forms. It's all these guys right here. Here's my listing agreement exclusive right to sell in the generic non-association related folder. I'm going to check that checkbox. You'll notice that whenever I checked the checkbox for this one, it only added one item to my basket. So I've only got one form added. But I also see that there's a checkbox here now for a different section. This is the sword listing. If I scroll back up to the top, that ADA one that I saw first also has the same checkbox. Now that means that there's 3 different checkboxes on here right now, and there's only one thing that I added into my basket. So if you guys ever happen to notice that when you checked this, a bunch of other checkboxes appeared on the screen, don't worry about that. Just keep focused on what your basket did. So if I uncheck that, check it again, my basket only increased by 1. So let's also get that lead-based paint disclosure. There we go. Here's our disclosure of lead-based paint. Oh, that's why I couldn't find it. It's disclosure of lead-based paint, not lead-based paint disclosure. So check that checkbox. Basket is at 2. And then we're also going to do a blank addendum as well. Oop, good to go. Now, if I need to review the forms that I'm going to be adding before I click this add button, I can click on that basket one last time, double check which of these I've added, and we can get rid of any of them if need be. So I'm going to click add. And now we have all of our forms added. Now, I did want to point something out. Even though we just got all of these added, we're not going to be filling them out quite yet. Remember, we're on step 4 of 5. We have not finished our wizard quite yet. So I'm going to hit next here. And this is going to bring us to our documents page. So just as a reminder again, forms are going to be things that we can fill out. They're going to be things that have some spaces that grab details, et cetera, et cetera. The documents, on the other hand, are going to be static information that you've already scanned or already have documentation on that's just needing to be put into this folder. So in my case, I actually have a document here for me. So I'm going to click on that add. You notice how this time, instead of it doing the folder system in the transaction desk, I have a button here that allows me to open the folders on my computer. So notice this is actually locally stored on my computer. So I grab my file that I needed. This is just a tax document for me to use. Hit open. And now I've got that added on here. Now we can also do some editing to the documents. I'll show you guys how to do that before we send it off to be signed. So I'm all done with my wizard now, so I can just hit this done button. I wanted to point something out though. While we've been going through all of these steps, you may have noticed this save and exit button that's kind of been lingering here at the bottom of each of our steps that we've been on. The save and exit button is actually going to allow us to save everything that we've added during the wizard process and then exit out of the wizard for now. I just want to show you guys what that looks like. So when I hit save and exit, it brings me to my transaction dashboard, again, whether I finished my wizard or not. So if I get called away for a showing or a closing is finally ready to happen or whatever the case may be, if I have to leave now, make sure to hit that save and exit button. Then when you guys get back into transaction desk later, jump into your transaction, jump back into your wizard, and it should drop you off wherever it was that you were last at. So for instance, I hit save and exit on the transaction dates screen. I can just double check that I have everything else in here. All set. We're all set. Perfect. I can hit done now. So, and I should point out now, since we've talked about the wizard button up at the top here, there's a new navigation pane that's over here on the right. So after we've gone through our wizard, gotten everything set up, we now have access to all of these different buttons that are specifically for this particular transaction that I'm in. So if I wanted to double check my details, I can go in here, we can make changes to this, we can change what the price is, we can add in any of the stuff that we didn't have before. We also have the button here for contacts. So for instance, if I did end up finally getting that email address from whoever it was that I didn't have it, I can jump into contacts and add that information, save it. This way, by the time I actually start my signing, they've already got their information ready to go. We also have a section here for forms, which is actually going to be our next step. So let's say that we need to start filling out all of the information for us to get things sent off to be signed. I need to head into my forms section, so I can either access the forms directly from here, or I can click the go to forms, or I can click forms over on the right. All of them should pretty much lead you to the same place where we see all of the forms that we've added to this transaction. We can click on them and start using. So when we click on this, the title of the form, it's going to bring us into the transactions form. This shows us all of the details that have been added thanks to the rest of the information we've already added to the transaction. So we've got the address, we've got that legal description that I put in, we've got the price, we've got the dates relating to the listing and the expiration. But there's also going to be a bunch of blank spaces on here indicated by those little faint blue lines here. So this little faint blue overlay is indicating to us that this can actually be edited. So for instance, if I wanted to put in 10% for my commission, which would be fantastic on $1 billion, plus let's do another million, why not? I mean, let's get as much as we can out of this. Have to sell within 1 day. Perfect. I got some information put in there. Again, I'm just putting stuff in. If any of you guys are having the hair raise on the back of your neck because you're like, oh my God, stop doing what you're doing. I'm just putting in some information. Don't worry. I'm not trying to fill this out in any way, shape, or form. Now, a little bit further down, we have a couple of those blue spaces that are actually checkboxes that are defining is or is not, does or does not, to purchase or not to purchase, to be or not to be. We've got some checkboxes here that are going to automatically contextualize whether or not another option has been done. So if I check the checkbox for is and then accidentally check the contradictory term, it's going to automatically uncheck that first one. So you shouldn't end up accidentally filling out something incorrectly. A little further down, we also have a gigantic blank space here for other conditions. This is where we can just type things out and add in whatever we need. If there's lines underneath this, it'll automatically remove those lines because it recognizes, hey, there's text over this. I don't need to actually make sure that there's lines for whoever's got their sloppy handwriting getting put on this. Finally, we also have the date options. You notice here we've got accepted this blank day of blank blank. Whenever I click on the calendar and then choose the day, it's going to automatically put it into a format that's going to make sense for this particular field. Now, the same thing is going to be true back up at the top here where we had our dates. So we've got the agreement begins on, here's our date. We got the agreement ends on this date. One of the cool things that they changed about the system, I think it was last year, I want to say, was that now whenever you end up making a change on a form for a detail that was previously put in elsewhere, so like let's say that I had the wrong price for this property, I can change the price, or in this case, I'm going to change my date. We're going to put this towards the end of next month. So got an expiration date. I've moved it on this particular form, and subsequently, if I go back to my details, it'll have that changed there as well. So you guys don't have to worry about, oh, I changed some date on one form and it's not going to be changed on a different form. It's always going to make sure that that's going to change everywhere that it appears. Now, at the very bottom of the screen as well, so we've got our date we just talked about. I did want to point out down here, we've got both of our contacts in here. So we've got George and Martha. We have that mailing address. Remember, we had the address that I checked the checkbox to fill out. Then we also have the email addresses for both clients. It's also going to provide us a space here for signatures. We do get calls occasionally. I don't think this happens often, thankfully, but we do have calls occasionally where people are worried where the signature blocks are going to be. If you guys are filling out a form, it's in the process of being filled out. You're not going to have to worry about signings and the rest of that stuff. This is only going to be focused on making sure the data on the form is correct, not where they're going to be signing, who's going to be signing in what position, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see all of that in a bit here. Now, I've saved all my information in here by just by the system standard of doing an autosave. We also have the option to manually save this. So full transparency, I'm really paranoid about saving things. In college, I had a hard drive fail on me at the end of a semester, and I was a digital artist. So that was literally all of my work for the semester just disappeared in a moment. It was devastating. So I have just become extremely paranoid about trying to save things. So even though I can trust that the system is going to try and save every couple of minutes, if my computer dies, I shouldn't end up losing too much work. There is also a file option up here at the top. It's a little folder icon. And we can click this save option right here to allow me to save this to the system. This way, when I'm in here, I can actually go ahead and just have the documentation that I've already put in saved. And then if I have my computer crash or I have to leave really quickly and close my browser without saving, it's all good. There's also going to be a couple options to leave this particular form so I can go work on another one. Right up here at the top right, there's a Save Exit button. This brings me back to my list. But let's say that I'm in a form and I don't want to have to go back into the list and then go back into another form. There is a button up here at the top. It's going to look like the actual forms icon. You can see that over here as well. The forms icon allows me to just navigate directly to another one. So rather than having to go back to a list, wait for it to load, click on another form, wait for it to load, I can just click on this list right up at the top and navigate between them. Now, when we got to this disclosure of lead-based paint, I wanted to point something out here. The disclosure of lead-based paint that we currently have in the system is a problem just because we actually only allow for the agent to fill this out. You notice how it actually is giving me the spaces to start adding information into this. Obviously, this is not the way that it's intended to be filled out. So if you guys do find yourself in a situation that you need to have this added to your transaction, we can add the checkboxes, and we can add the text in there and then just have the client sign it. But typically, they need to be the ones that sign it, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that when we get to the signing process. All right, so I'm all done with this form. Again, I can go over here, save it, and then I'm going to move on to our blank addendum. Now, the blank addendum is actually going to function a little differently than most of the other forms that we have. You guys will notice that the property information up at the top here is filled out, and then the rest of this is blank. What this is indicating to us is just that this particular form is completely open-ended. It doesn't even have any roles that are tied to the signature blocks down here at the very bottom. So we can see I've got a space here for me to put in a name. We don't have any role that's been assigned to this particular field, so it didn't grab George or Martha earlier. So I'm just going to manually add in George. Hit Tab, add Martha, and we're set. Oh, and actually I was going to clear out this because then we can put in the names if we need to. And then I mentioned earlier that whenever there's text fields that have the backdrop of the lines, as soon as I start typing, it clears all of those lines out so that way I don't have to worry about there being lines that are kind of bisecting my text that I've added to the screen. It just covers it all up as soon as we start typing. So I'm going to say, would you like a fruit basket? we go. Yes. And also any food allergies. Again, I'm just trying to put something in here. Obviously, we're not going to try and add an addendum to our contract just to find out if they want a fruit basket, but I just needed something to add in here. So I'm all set with this one. I'm going to hit the save and exit button this time because I actually don't have any more forms that I need to fill out. So that's how we work with our forms. The next thing I want to discuss is our documents. So I'm going to head over to our documents section. You may remember earlier I added in a PDF that was going to be added to the documents. This is actually going to work a little different than the forms did. When I click on the name of the document, it's effectively just giving me a preview. Now there's a markup button up here at the top, but there's also going to be a little button over here to the right that's actually the menu for this particular form. This is where we also have a couple extra options, like we can delete it, download it, add some extra details to it, and there's also a slice/markup option. Now, in my case, the document that I had imported is actually in a not particularly great state. So I'm going to click on this slice option, and I can see that I've got one page that's horizontal, and then the rest of them are vertical. I need to get this one separated out as well, because this is the tax record, and this is just a previous listing for the property. So I'm going to click on this one page. You notice how it adds a blue border to this. Then I'm going to hit the rotate button, get it to the proper orientation. And I actually want to save this out as a separate document. So what I can do is I can hit save, and it's going to take just the selected page, and I'm going to say tax document, go, save. I'm going to unclick it so we notice the border has disappeared, and then we can check the rest of those. So now I can save these as a separate document again. Or if I want to, instead of taking these selected pages, I can actually just save it where it's just going to be the selected pages as the original document. So I don't have to give it a name because now it's only going to be those documents or those pages, excuse me. There's also going to be an option here that's the document markup tool. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to add in any highlights or text, or if there's a whole section that I needed to redact, I can redact it, add in any highlights if I needed to, add any lines in case I needed to like cross out just one line of text. And then there's also a free draw, which is just kind of chaotic. Delete that one. Delete, perfect. And then we also have the option to add in any text. So even though this is just something that we scanned and it didn't have any preformed spaces or grab any details from anywhere else, we can add in any text that we need to that particular document. There we go. Move that over. We're all set. Now, that was just a little bit of a kind of cursory overview. I'm going to save that information, and we'll see that whenever we get back into the signing process. So now I actually have two different documents in here. We've got the previous listing and then the tax document, which I'm actually going to be sending to get checked off by the client. So I'm going to head back to my forms section for a moment. Most of the time that I'm having people call in with questions about how to start signing, it's going to be that they're in a different place and they need to just head back to where they can check checkboxes. So for instance, some people will try and start a signing and they don't see the checkbox option over here. They don't see the checkbox option in the documents. You have to be in those sections in order to see the checkboxes. Now, the reason those are important is because whenever I click the select all, or if I select any individual options, you notice it starts filling up my basket right here. So if I uncheck some, you can see that basket fill back up again. Once my basket is full of all the things that I need to send off to be signed, I can click on the basket and then click on the Send New Authentisign option. There's a couple extra buttons in here. I'd recommend exploring those at your leisure. The most important one is Save as PDF or just simply print. You guys are just having somebody in person right now. But I'm going to send to Authentisign. And this is going to begin the signing process. So we're actually going to leave this For now, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So what I need is for everybody to come back at 10:05. I'm going to put the music on and have the video playing again. So if you guys do end up hearing the music stop or you see the video disappear, we're going to be starting up again. And I wanted to mention as well, whenever you guys get back, I'm also going to be doing a quick poll to make sure that you guys are actually present. So don't miss out. We're going to, come on. There we go. Don't miss out. I want to make sure that everybody's getting the credit that they want for class today. So be back here at, oh, wow, I've been talking for almost a full minute anyway. Be back here at 10:06. I'm going to put the music back on. There we go. See, that's how the music is supposed to fade out at the beginning of class. That's the right way to do it. All right. Move this out of the way. All right. So welcome back, everybody. If you guys wouldn't mind, hit that raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. I just need to see that everybody's returned. Then we can go ahead and get started again. Excellent. I got most of you guys back. Anne, Donna, Jasmine, Randy, and Steph. If you guys wouldn't mind, hit that raise hand button. Thank you. I just want to make sure everybody's back and we can give you guys the CE credit. And if you've hit that raise hand button, you can just leave it up for now. Excellent. I appreciate it. And then Anne and Jasmine, I think, are the only ones left. All right. Well, Anne, Jasmine, if you guys can hear me, maybe post something in chat or Q&A if you guys can't hit that raise hand button, or else I might not be able to give you the CE credit. Just so you guys are aware, part of the reason why we do this raise hand trick instead of the any alternatives to this is because if we check for participation during our class, OREC can allow us to give you guys the CE credit without having to have your video on. So if we can try and make sure that everybody's participating during the course, it allows us to make sure that we don't have to have the cameras going the entire time the class is on, which means that I would need somebody else to watch that the entire time I'm teaching so that I can focus on teaching. That isn't really an option right now. But yeah, again, Anne or Jasmine, if you guys can hear me, hit that raise hand button or post something in chat. But we're going to go ahead and get started again. All right. So where we left off is that we actually had gotten into the signing process. So what we're seeing here is that we've actually got the blank addendum, which happens to just be the first thing that the system decided to add. Then we've got our disclosure of lead-based paint, and then our listing agreement. And notice that all of these are just kind of being treated as if they're all one document as we start scrolling down. Now, that's not necessarily indicating to us that this is all going to be saved as one document after the fact. These are all still going to have their own name at the top. And then when they get signed and saved, it's still all going to be separate signed documents. So it should still be easy. All right. Now over here on the right-hand side is where we start adding in some of our details about this. We've got signers, docs, tools, layouts, and options. There's also a feedback button in case you guys need to let them know that there's something that's not working the way that it's intended to. And then right up here at the very top of the screen, so above the section here that shows the preview of what we're signing, we also have the name of the signing. Now in my case, it's just grabbed whatever the alphabetically highest option was, which is blank addendum. When we see this signing name, I would very strongly suggest that you guys name this something that's going to make sense to you in the future. Oh, I'm so sorry, Phil, I see that your hand is up. Did you have a question? Oh, no, you're good. Yeah, just wanted to double check. Anyway, so when you guys name your signings, make sure that it's something that's going to make sense to you in the future. So for instance, if this was all being sent off because I'm trying to get the listing agreement signed, there just happen to be some extra documents in there, I can put in listing agreement. And that way, whenever this gets sent off, this is what it's going to be referred to as. Whenever I find it in my system again, all of these documents that I'm getting signed right now are all going to be referred to as the listing agreement in the signing. And then there's also going to be a folder that was put together that's going to have this same name as well. So that way I don't have to worry about, what folder it was, where it was, so on and so forth. All right. So over here on the right-hand side now, we've got our signers options. This is where we can add in any of the participants that we're going to be using for class or for the signing. When I click on this add participants button, it's got add yourself, add new, add from transactions, or add from contacts. I kind of wish that they would rearrange this so that the add from transaction was the first option, but Just remember this add from transaction is actually going to pull from the people that we already have in this particular transaction. So I can just grab George and Martha. I'm going to make sure that they're both put in as remote signers. And then if I had a lawyer or somebody else that needed to kind of do a review of the process, I can check that and then switch their type over to reviewer. The reviewer option is actually just effectively a binary. So what that means is that we're going to actually be looking at um, a signing that doesn't require them to put a signature on anything. It doesn't allow them to make any changes to the documents, but they can either say yay or nay, and that's it. So if they approve the document, it moves on to the other signers. If they do not, it goes back to you as rejected. Easy peasy. Now, I don't need to review this, and I also don't need a carbon copy of this after everything is signed. So I'm just going to uncheck that checkbox. So I've got both of my signers put in. I'm going to hit select down here at the bottom. And now we see that this has actually been assigned a different color for each person that's going to be participating. If I scroll down my list, I can actually see that every time George is supposed to sign, it's yellow. Every time Martha is supposed to sign, it's blue. We also have the option to set up a signing order. So if we wanted to have Martha be the one that does the review at the beginning because George was too busy trying to check all the founding fathers documents that, he didn't actually read through that stuff, we can set in signing order and have Martha be the first person that reviews everything. And by the time it makes it to George, he just puts his John Hancock on it. So if you guys need to adjust that, just grab these handles here and you're set. Now we also have some individual options for this. If you guys remember, both of them are using the exact same email address. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click on this little arrow here, and it pulls up more information about this individual. So if I needed to make some last minute changes, like changing the email address or putting in some custom initials for it, we can get all of that information put in there. We also have the option to choose what signature options they can do. So for instance, choose signature font, which is a probably wise one to include, draw a signature, or upload signature image, which I don't think is a very wise idea, but apparently there's some people out there that do that. It's effectively like a digital stamp. And if somebody steals your stamp, they can sign as you. Big surprise. So I'm going to leave all of those checked, but since they are sharing that email address, I'm going to actually go focusing on this pin option here. So I'm going to give 1234 to George, obviously as a very hopefully self-evident recommendation. Do not use 1234 or 000 or anything that's going to be easily guessed. But I'm going to deliver this to George, probably by carrier pigeon. And then we're going to give Martha a signature pin as well. There we go. Excellent. And she also needs some signature or custom initials. So I'll save that. Perfect. So now George and Martha both have a signing pin. So even though they're at the same email address, I can hopefully rest assured that they're not going to share their pins. And they'll be able to sign just for themselves. Now, the next thing we need to do is add in that extra tax document that I needed them to review. So I'm going to click on Docs next. This allows me to also rearrange the documents that are already there. So I can actually put my listing agreement up at the top, my lead-based paint disclosure in the center, and then I'm also going to add a document or form. One of the nice things about this is that whenever we get into this, it's going to have under My Transaction, all of our forms indicated by this little icon here, and then all of our documents as well. Icon there, and again, they both also say that underneath each as well. So I'm going to add in my tax document, click Add, and now that'll appear at the very end. If I needed to make any changes to these individual documents, we do have the option to switch it out here. There's a couple of choices. You don't have to worry about those. Most people aren't going to use them, but they're available if you need them. The next section down is going to be our tools. Now the tools are going to be delineated by each of the different signers. So the participants in this case are going to, again, have all of their colors indicated. So anything that's related to George Washington, again, is yellow. I have more yellow options that I can add here. And again, if I need to switch over to Martha, click on the drop down up at the top, switch to Martha, and now all of my options are blue. So I'm going to scroll down here. Martha is going to be the one that actually needs to review this disclosure of lead-based paint. So she's already got a signature block here. So the only things I actually need to put on are going to be an either or option and a space for her to add some text. So here we have either or. So I'm going to do a radio choice option. The radio choice, as I drag it over here, is only going to drag one dot, but as soon as I let go and put it into position, it adds in a second dot. Now this is going to allow them to do either this one or that one. So if they check one and then check the other, it's going to remain on the other option. We also have a section here for the text line. So I'm going to swing that on there as well. And when we add this on, I can click on it and then also make it fill the entire line if we needed to. You also notice that whenever you select either the dot or the text or even just the signature block, it starts changing what the options are over here on the tools side. So let's actually talk about the either or option. When I select this, we do have the choice to either make it larger or smaller. We set it as well. We also have on this text field whether or not we want it to be required or not. And then we also have if there's a, here, let me add in the next either or, go, and then we need one more text line just in case she needs it. Select it, expand it out, perfect. Then we've also got some checkboxes here if we need to. If we need to add in something like this, you notice how it's actually requiring an initial for this. So I can grab the initials block, put that on there. It's a little bit too large, so I'm just going to make that a little smaller. Grab another initials block. Again, a little too large, let's make that a little smaller. There we go. And both of these were added with something that looks the same as the signature blocks down here at the bottom. Notice there's that little red border. There's even a little asterisk next to each of these. What this is indicating is that this has actually been set as a required field. So if I select this, I can actually see that this allows me to switch between required or not, just like we had with our text boxes here. And then there's also some extra options. We can add in a name block, a date stamp, a time stamp. We don't need those for this particular field, since it's just the initials. But I also want to make sure that if they have not received any of this information, I can uncheck that to make it not required. Here we go. And then we have an either or option again. Just drop that on there. Oop. And then finally, another initial option. But let's say that this wasn't something that required the initial, maybe it was just a checkbox that we needed to fill out. There's also a checkbox option here that's going to be the checkbox choice. So if I just end up moving that into position here, it's going to require her to actually acknowledge that this has been done, or in this case, it's actually my acknowledgement that it's requiring. So there is just that, check it or not kind of situation. And again, you can make this required or not as well. So if you guys wanted to do that in place of the initials, oops, as I grab the initial again. There we go. All right. So I'm going to scroll down next to our blank addendum. So let's talk about the rest of these options. George actually has a signature down here, and we've also got a space that was supposed to have Martha, but I don't have it yet. So I'm going to actually add in the signature block. I'm going to resize it just a little bit so that it's in a better position. And it also added in a little date stamp as well, which is handy because I need to put the date stamp up at the top here. But there's something else that needed to be added. It doesn't actually say Martha's name underneath. So I'm going to click on this box again. So this is our signature block. You notice how we have, whether it's required, we have that name block that I mentioned earlier and a date stamp. The date stamp is already on here. So I'm going to just check the checkbox here for name block. And notice it adds in her name immediately underneath there. So I don't actually have to go through the rigmarole of jumping out of the signing by hitting back, saving what work I've gotten, add that information to the form, come back into the signing, and then go back through that whole process. I just select it, add name block, or if you guys want to, you can also just drag the name over from these signer fields. You can add in a whole bunch of extra information in case I needed to. Now, if we do end up adding stuff that we don't need anymore, you can select it. There's a delete button over here. There's a trash can icon here, or you can select things and just hit delete on your keyboard. Now, we also have a initial pages option. So if you guys would like to actually add an initial pages to either one document or a bunch of them, you click on this initial pages, and it's going to actually do this for either or you can do all at once. So I want to do this to my tax document down here at the bottom. I'm going to do a small one. We're going to do it at the top right, and I want it to be at the top of the document. I need both individuals to do their initials, and we're only going to do it for the tax document. I do even have the option to just choose which page it's going to be on. So for instance, if we had something that was multiple pages and we needed it to only be on certain pages or all of them, we can choose that. So scroll back down here. So I've got my choices made, small, right, top, both of them on tax document. Perfect. Place initials, and there we go. So it's added both of those onto there. We can still rearrange those as well. So for instance, if I ended up wanting to maybe move this to a different position, we can do that. Or we can even just go back to initial pages, right, bottom of document, boom, boom, and place initials. There we go. Now they're both in the right spot. All right. But I also have the, would you like a fruit basket at closing? I'm going to use that radio choice button one last time. Boom, boom. Got those. And now let's finally talk about the last option. We've got a drop down. Now, the drop down option is actually something that's very new to this system. So when we add it, you can do the same thing that you guys had before. You can resize it. But notice on the right here, it's actually going to be asking for a tooltip text. So I'm going to say food allergies, fruit allergies. And then we're also going to put in, let's do a none option. We'll do apples, oranges, grapes. Random fact that I just learned the other day because our cats were being weird. Cats are extremely allergic to grapes, just as a random aside. Anyway, so I've got all of those added. So the next time, or when they get into the signing, they're actually going to have a drop down that's going to choose those. So obviously this is a terrible example because maybe they have multiple allergies, but if you guys just wanted to have them choose effectively a multiple choice without all of the choices appearing, you can have the define options here. You can even use the default option there. All right. And as one last thing, I think I did actually forget this. Initial choice is the same as radio choice. They actually have to sign off on these. But easy peasy. All right. Now, that's the end of it for what the signers are going to participate in. Again, if we needed to do George's signature somewhere, we have to switch over to his name, drag that into position, resize it if we would like to, and then put that in the right spot. All set. All right. So now let's actually look at this markup information. This is going to be for us to use. So the rest of this stuff, we've got colors on it associated with a specific participant. We've even got signer fields that have a little color added to it. The markup options, though, are actually just going to be for us to add in any text that we maybe forgot. So I'm going to add in a text box over here. We'll say, perfect. Let me know if there's anything else you need. If I needed to make any adjustments to the text, I can change the size of it. I can change what color it is. Green is my favorite. It's objectively the best color. And we'll do centered. We'll make it bold since it's very hard to read. Actually, let's change the font. Perfect. All right. And if I need to delete that, again, just hit delete. We've got a highlight option. This works the same way as that one that we saw when we were marking up the documents. There's a line option, so if we needed to cross something out. By the way, just as a reminder, if you guys select one of these, it's just going to allow you to keep on adding. So as I click and drag on these, it's just going to allow me to add in a bunch of extra lines. Freehand works the same way. If I leave it on freehand, I actually have to click the button to make it stop being the freehand. Highlight works the same way. We can highlight multiple sections on the page all at once. So, outside of this bad abstract art, I'm just going to delete all that because That looks like trash. There we go. So we're all set. I think I'm ready to actually get this sent off to be signed. So I'm going to head over to the layouts section. We'll talk about this before we head to the signing process. So on the layouts, let's say that this is actually something that we send often. So like this is an addendum that my company has added. Maybe there's some kind of like auction, something or other that needs to be signed. So I actually want to save this for future use. What I can do is actually go to this layouts option, and there's a button here for create layouts. This is going to allow me to save this particular form that I have, so that all the customizations I've made, the signature block down here that's associated to the signer or seller, another signature block that's associated with the other seller, some drop downs, so on and so forth. All of that can be saved using this create layouts button. And then once you guys have actually created that, one of the cool things that you guys can do is if it's completely blank, we can go to layouts. And the next time I've actually gotten to this exact same company document or whatever, I can do apply layouts, go to my blank addendum, find the layout that I would like to add. Go, assign signature layouts, and it automatically puts everything back there for me. So now I've got, actually this one looks like it's a little better. We've got the either or option, and then any food allergies. We've got one for George and one for Martha. The spot down here is missing Martha's signature block. So I'm gonna actually switch over to her, add in her full name, and I'm all set. So that's all of our tools and functions for the signing. The last choice on here is going to be our options. And coincidentally, this is actually just defining some things that are already present on your screen, or you're gonna have to fill out in just a moment anyway. So we've got the signing details. Look at that, it's just the name, which we already defined up here. We've got the expiration dates, which is actually something that we'll be filling out next, but I can set that expiration date if need be. We've also got reminders. They can either send some, you can send them on a specific schedule or not. But all of those options, other than the signing, is actually going to appear when we hit next. So when you hit next, again, it gives us another expiration. And I'm going to say that I want it every day. And I want to send a reminder at, let's say, 12 p.m. There we go. So if they don't end up signing it, I'm going to have it send back out again at noon. There's also a button down here at the very bottom that customizes the invites as well. So if I needed to, I can actually customize this to say, all right, so George is going to be signing first. I need to say, please sign immediately. There we go. And Martha can't sign until you two. And that would be if I had set that checkbox earlier, the toggle earlier for signing order. I'm going to show you guys, just we'll pretend that that's what I chose. I want to show you guys what it looks like on the subject and the message that it comes in with. And then I'm also going to leave Martha's on the default so you guys can see the boilerplate text. So I'm going to save that, send it off, and we're good to go. Now I can just wait until my clients have actually gotten that signed. Back in Transaction Desk, it's actually going to now show me that I have sent my signing. Now, it brought me back here without actually showing me where it navigated from. Just as a quick recap, after we created our transaction, we needed to get our forms filled out. So we went to our forms, we checked the check boxes, clicked on the basket, started assigning. After we got the signing sent off, it's now showing up under the signing section over here on the right. Remember the name that I gave it? It's already showing up at the top here. Originally had named it something after the form that I had chosen. Didn't need that, renamed it. And I can also see what status it's in. So I've sent it off to the client, but I see that neither of them has completed this particular process quite yet. So let's actually now switch gears. I'm actually going to show you guys what this looks like on the receiver's end. So I'm going to drag this over here. And we've got our training agent, which is the name of the account that I was signed into. We've got the email that was sent off. We've got one that's going to be addressed to Martha, and then we've got another one that's addressed to George. Notice on George's, it actually just says, please sign immediately up at the top, no other text. So make sure that this still, if you guys do customize a subject, make sure it still makes sense. A little further down, we also see the Martha can't sign until you do. It's kind of sandwiched in there, but it does actually try to make a note of it. Let's get started with George's signature. Doesn't have to be him first, but start with that. Before he gets started with anything else, he's going to have to put in his signing PIN. Again, even though they share an email address, we also want to make sure that they aren't signing as each other. So as soon as they get in, they accept the terms and conditions of this, and now they can go through the process of signing. If you do end up in a situation where someone is maybe not particularly tech savvy, or maybe just kind of needs a little bit of assistance getting to where they need to start, there's a start button over at the top right. And there's also an option if you guys have someone with maybe limited mobility, if they hit the space bar, it's going to move them. Oh, I'm fairly certain they actually just removed this function. Now it just moves down the page. I may ask them to return that. I don't know if you guys used the previous system or not, but in the previous system, what it would do is actually you hit the space bar, and it would immediately send you to the very first option, but it looks like you just have to hit the start button now. Anyway, hit the start button. It's going to swing you down to the first spot. Click on that spot, and it's going to allow them to put in their signature, either choosing a specific font, or they can draw it in, which I am. Nope. Okay, that also looks bad. All right, we're just going to do a font because I don't need to make a complete mess of this. So once I've clicked that, after choosing my font, it's going to just swing me down again to the next option, and then the next option, and the next option, and then we're good to go. So there's one last initial on the last page. If I hit next, it'll swing me to that, and I'm all done. So if you guys have completed the signing, it'll come up with this complete signing button. There's also a finish button. They can close out of that if they wanted to, in case they maybe missed something, and then they can click on finish again. But I would strongly suggest that you guys actually give a try to this whole process, primarily just because I want you guys to see what it looks like from your client's end. Oftentimes we'll get calls from people and they'll be like, well, my client can't see X, Y, or Z. Well, oftentimes it does boil down to the agent just simply not knowing what the client is seeing because they've never actually done the signing process before. So if you guys can familiarize yourself with it, you might be able to walk your client through something that they can pretty easily find otherwise. But if you don't know, you don't know. So the last step on here after we've done our signing is this congratulations, you're all done. It's got a signing ID, which is a code that's specific to this signing. And it even shows what the date is. There's an option here to download as well, but I'm going to show you guys after this process has actually been completed, George is going to receive an email with the signed documents, and so is Martha. So I'm going to click on Martha's signature next. She's going to start her signing, put in her signing PIN. Thanks, accept. All right. And same thing goes for her. She can scroll through this. She can review everything that she needs to at her leisure. And then as soon as she's ready to start signing, there's a start button. So click on it, choose her signature style. Let's do tangerine this time. Check a checkbox, enter some text if need be, check a different checkbox, and it no longer has the first one checked. Do the next one, check, accept. The above, good to go. Easy peasy. Again, notice it just kind of guided me through that entire process. So even without those next and back and so on and so forth, they can still move pretty quickly. Oh, and Sharon asked, how do they know their PIN? That would have been something that I would have had to have delivered to them. So as I mentioned earlier, that the option that I kind of prefer to use is to just give it to them over the phone. Whether you give them a phone call or send them a text message. I personally think the text message option isn't particularly as safe as most people would think. Not that I suspect everybody's got partners that are, checking on their phones or checking their text messages, but just since that is a possibility, I just would not take the chance on it. Give them a call. You know who you're talking to, or if you meet them in person, you give them their PIN in person, whatever the case may be. But yeah, then that way they know what they're supposed to put in and they don't end up accidentally signing as the other person or intentionally signing it as the other person. So before we hit the finish button and actually complete the signing on hers, I wanted to address just a couple of the other options on here. There's a gigantic reject button. So if there was some term or condition that they did not like, they can hit reject. There's also an options button where they can change their signature. If they didn't like the way that they got their signature block, they can go back and say, oh, you know what? Actually, I want this Christie one. That seems more my style. And then they have to go back, redo the entire signing again, just to make sure that they've got everything that's needed filled out. Good to go. Once they've completed their signing again, we've got that same exact signing ID since both of these people had signed under the same signing. So just to clarify, this long number that's just impossibly huge, they are going to have the exact same code for every single signing. If you guys take the exact same documents and send them to a different person, different signing ID. If you take the exact same people and send them different documents, different signing ID. It's always going to be a different signing ID for each and every signing. Now, part of the reason that is because AuthentiSign keeps a gigantic repository of every single signing and how the people interacted with the signing, who it was sent from, who received it, what was the IP address of the computer that they received this and signed it on, what was the exact second that they ended up signing it. Like there's a bunch of details that they can use to effectively prove that this is a legally binding contract because they digitally signed this. So they do have an option to provide some feedback, but I'm all set here. So I'm going to head back to my email. And you'll notice that now I actually have two new emails, one that's going to be addressed to Martha, one that's going to be addressed to George. And both of them will now have a copy of an email that says, here's all your signed documents. Here's your signing certificate. Here's each of the individual documents with the signings on them. And then here's also the certificate for each individual document, just to make sure that, lo and behold, you got a lender that's like, I don't know about this tax document signature. I need to see the certificate on it. No, I got that for you. So they have all of that information sent out back to them so that your client is also empowered to give what they need to whoever they need. All right, so close out of that. And now let's head back to Transaction Desk. Let's say I went out and did a signing or whatever, and I come back, sign into Transaction Desk without even having to go into that transaction to check on the status of the signing. Because I still have that AuthentiSign section on my homepage, I can actually already see, all right, here's my listing agreement that I sent off. Here's the transaction that it was associated with. Here's when I initially created it. And look at that, already completed. So without even having to go into the signing to check it or even go into the transaction to check it, it's already on the homepage for me. If we do end up wanting to check individual statuses, so for instance, if I had sent this off and then nobody ended up receiving it or nobody ended up signing it, I can click on the actual signing name. And this is going to show me each of the individuals that's participating, whether they had initially gotten into it, whether they had also signed it. So we do end up having some people call in and they're like, well, it's just my clients can't seem to finish the signing. Well, sometimes it's just that they didn't click all the options or there was a spare option that they didn't see. Again, that next and previous option over on the right-hand side of the screen should move them to where they need to go. It's just a matter of them actually clicking the space. Additionally, we do end up having some people sometimes that need to change the email address after the fact. And this is also where you can do that. So you just click on the name of the signing, and there's going to be a little edit button over here to the right that's going to allow you to make a change to the contact's information. Now, let's say that there's a worst case scenario and you find out that there's something wrong on the forms or documents, or maybe you didn't put a signature block where you need it to go, or whatever the case may be. There is a button up at the top here that allows us to reset anytime before the signing has been completed. So it'll say reset, duplicate, delete. And in fact, think this one should allow me. Yeah. So for instance, it looks like Joanna Johnson ended up not approving this particular process. She hit that reject button. Jeremiah didn't even get the email. He didn't even sign in or approve it because she had already rejected it. If I needed to go back and make a change to this, I can hit reset. It's going to bring me back into the signing process with whoever it was that I had initially sent this off to, and with whatever documents were initially sent off as well. So if they end up not approving it because maybe there wasn't a signature block or there wasn't enough options for them to choose between because they hadn't initially gotten any of that stuff put on there, they can reject it, and then I can hit reset to put it all back in there and then just immediately send it back out to them. So that way I don't have to worry about starting a brand new signing with the same exact documents, making the same exact changes, so on and so on and so on. All right. So let's jump back into our specific transaction. Oh, and Sherry asked, resetting resets the entire document. It doesn't reset the entire document. What it's doing is it's resetting the signing itself. So any of the changes that I had already made to those forms or documents before the signing will still be in place, and I just need to make changes to how the signing was. If you do end up needing to actually change the form in order to actually get that sent out because there was maybe numbers wrong or there was names in the wrong places or their names were wrong, whatever, that's actually going to require a brand new signing. And actually, speaking of which, thank you, Sherry. I just remembered something else that I usually make a bigger deal out of. I can't stress this enough. Whenever you guys are creating your transaction and then going to be sending this off to someone, it is extremely important that you guys have all of your ducks in a row first. So again, I mentioned it at the beginning of class, but just to reiterate, whenever you guys are creating the contacts during the wizard at the beginning, if you add the email in then, you're not going to have to worry about adding that in during your signing process. If you end up having some forms that weren't completely filled out before you start the signing, adding that detail that was missing during the signing does not change the form. That means that when you go back to this form later and have it signed by a different individual or whatever, it's not going to include the information that was missing because it was added during the signing. So again, always make sure that all your forms, documents, contacts, and details are all correct before you even start a signing. It's just going to save you guys a lot of trouble and pain and headaches. All right. But yeah, thank you for asking that. That's a good thing to bring up. All right, let's hop back into our transaction. And I want to show you guys what's happened to these signed documents. Now, on the left-hand side here, we actually see there's a similar section to what we have for forms over here with documents now. This is just going to show us everything that we have in there, whether it was signed, certificate, or whatever the case may be. But if I go into the documents section, so either clicking it over here on the right or clicking it underneath the list on the left, this is going to bring us to a much simpler list. You notice that this actually has a folder icon, and we've got that same document we were working with before and the tax document that we were working with before. Now, the folder is actually labeled the exact same thing that we saw whenever we were initially sending off our listing, or our signing, excuse me. So this listing agreement folder is actually all of the signed versions of the documents and also all of the certificates related to those documents. So whenever I hold my cursor over any of the documents little icon to the left here, it says certified and digitally signed. This is indicating that this is actually not a form that can still be made changes to. This is indicating that I actually have something that has the client's signatures on them. And we're all set. Now, we also do have the option to send these out to be signed again. So for instance, this disclosure of lead-based paint, let's say that I've already gone in and I've got my buyer lined up and I'm very excited about, here's my buyer, McBuy. There we go. So I'm ready to get that document that we had already gotten signed by one contact, so the sellers in this case. I want to get this sent off to be signed again. I check the checkbox. Here's my basket once more. And would you look at that? There's a signing button here. So we can start that signing process. But this time I'm actually going to be adding in the buyer. Now, there's going to be one thing that we need to actually make a change to. You notice in this case, buyer McBuy actually is giving me a little error message. When I click on this, it's missing the email. So remember that pane that I mentioned earlier? This is the pane that I was talking about. So when you guys are finally to the point that you're going to be sending something off, if you do not have their email address in there, you've got to fill more information out. And if I need to interact with this buyer McBuy more times by sending him more documents, if I don't have his email, I'm going to have to add it every single time I start assigning. There is an option to correct that, and that's actually this one right here. Most people don't notice it. So if I do end up adding in an email address and I want that to appear on his contact in the future, check the checkbox, save, and I'm good to go. So now buyer McBuy will have an email address the next time I try to send something to him. All right. So don't save that. Let's head back in here. Excellent. Hey, we're actually on schedule for one time this time. A couple of the things that we need to discuss about the documents. You'll notice over here to the right, there is a submit button. Now, this was not available whenever we were looking at the forms, but what this documents allows us to do is actually submit any of these signed versions of things or scanned versions of things over to the broker for them to actually review and make sure that everything's copacetic. There's also a menu button over here to the right. We've already talked about this just a little bit. But whenever we check these checkboxes, you're going to get a little bit different options than what you had with forms. We have the option now to send a whole bunch of documents out to be reviewed. We have the option to move these. So in case I wanted to actually set up my own folder, a hierarchy, instead of it just being, here's assigning, here's a folder, here's assigning, another folder, here's another folder. It's going to be something where we can actually create our own folders using this add button. And then we can add the documents to that. There's also a merge option so that if we needed to add a bunch of things in together, so that instead of it being, a bunch of separate documents, we can just merge those all into one document. Go, merge. There's also a copy option in case we needed to move this to a different folder. Copy to cloud, which is just going to allow us to move everything over to any of those third-party services. There's a download option. This is going to be a zip that includes all of these all at once. We can get them all signed again, get them printed, faxed, emailed, or just throw them away. I did want to point out one note with the send to email. It allows us to put in a recipient name and email address, but there's two different options for how we send this out. We can either send it as a link, which means that I'm actually just going to be giving them a link. They have to click on that, then they have to download it if they want them. Or we can send as an attachment, which means that it's actually going to be included in the email as an attachment, which is typically the preferable option. Also get to double check what items we have and also include the fax back cover sheet if we need to. Easy peasy. All right, now let's actually talk about a couple extra options. I'm going to head back to my forms section. Let's say that I'm finally to the point, I got my listing agreement signed. I need to actually start filling out my property data form or my property condition disclosure. So I'm going to click the add button for forms. And we actually have a form for each of those items. So I'm going to just do property data. Go. Here's my MLS property data form. This is going to be commercial, leasing, residential, vacant. Again, those are our main four. I'm going to check the checkbox for property data form for residential. And we're also going to do condition. And the reason I bring this up is because we've actually got two different versions of the property condition disclosure. Oh, here we go, these two. We've got two different versions of these, and I wanted to point out that one of them is going to say agent interactive, and the other one is going to tell them client interactive. I'm going to add both of these so I can kind of highlight the differences between these two. So the first thing I need to fill out is our MLS property data form. When I open this up, this is actually going to take some of the details that I've already got added to other parts of the system. So who the owner is, what the address is, so on and so forth. I'm going to just make a couple changes to this. Street. Go, clear that out. put in my subdivision. Parcel number, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, you guys get the idea. So we can start filling this out digitally. So instead of having to, print this off and start filling everything out, you guys could pull this up on your laptop, pull it up on your iPad, even pull it up on your phone if you wanted to, and start filling out these details digitally. And then you can just hit this button up here at the top that says upload listing, and it'll save any of the details that you've added and add that to an incomplete listing in Matrix. Now, I did want to point something out that this is actually an option that's only going to be available if you guys already have add edit permissions. So if you guys do not have add edit permissions, you will not even have the option to do this upload listing button, just as a heads up. If you would like to get add edit permission, that's something that your broker will have to add to your documentation with our membership team. So there's a form that you have to send in. It's got the add edit permissions, has to be signed by the broker, and we can get that put on your system. But saves a bunch of time if you guys do have that. But even if you guys don't have the ability to upload the listing yourself, which I'll go ahead and hit so you guys can see it, even if you don't have that upload listing button and you have some other admin that's going to be putting it in, if you guys fill it out digitally, that's going to save them a lot of time as well. On top of the fact that now they can just copy paste things in, which I don't know how many times you guys have had your admins maybe bungle a minor part of the listing details or maybe a major part of the listing details. But if you provide it to them like this, everything should be explicitly clear. No having to worry about, well, I put in a wrong tax parcel number because my handwriting is garbage, which is actually true for me. Anyway, I'm going to copy this MLS number. Let's go take a look at what that incomplete listing actually looks like. I can see that under my quick modify list, it's the most recent one, or I can put the MLS number in here. And we can see that all of the details are already added into the residential section that were able to be moved over from transaction desk. So any of the things that I had filled out, we got 765 East Main Street, Tulsa County unplatted, we've got the parcel number, county, city, zip code, we've got even the legal description put in there. List price, list date. Looks like it didn't import over the expiration date. That's okay. But almost everything that you guys might need that was already filled out should actually appear here. Anyway, let's move back to transaction desk and talk about those property condition disclosures. So I mentioned before that there's two different versions. We've got the agent interactive and the client interactive. The agent interactive is the one that most people will think is the one that they need because when they get in to take a look at the agent interactive, oh, look, I've got a bunch of check boxes. I can check between each of these, try and choose which one is appropriate, blah, 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 blah. This is not the way that it's meant to be filled out, as you guys are aware. So this is not typically the one that you would need. There are still going to be some situations where this might be required, but I just wanted to let you guys know this is available. This is how it will work. But more often than not, you're going to need the client interactive. The reason we get so many phone calls with problems with this particular form is because when they get in to take a look at it to edit it, they're looking at this form and they see a bunch of blanks. And that's because this is something that the client will be filling out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get this sent off to sign. So I'm going to hit this send to new Authentisign button. That means it's only going to take whatever form I happen to be on, just as a heads up. If you hit that signing button, it's only going to grab, you guys notice, just this particular form. And then another reason why people are kind of wigging out about this right now is because the new signing system, whenever we end up adding this document into the signing, it doesn't have any of the fields available until we actually add somebody from the transaction. If I add in my buyer, wow, would you look at that? There's no fields for him to fill out. He's got some initials that he can put on, but that's it. If I end up adding in a seller, so remove him, add in my seller, watch what happens as soon as I add in a seller. Boom, suddenly there's a whole bunch of checkboxes. This is how it's supposed to appear. And whenever we send this off to George to get signed, this is how he will see this field. It's going to ask him to fill out every single one of these, and it will not let him complete the signing until he's hit every single one. Now, bear in mind that can be extremely cumbersome to your clients, and they may end up calling you with questions. Just remind them that there's going to be that next and back button over here on the right-hand side, next previous, I think, on the right-hand side that allows them to move between any of the fields that they do not have filled out yet. All right, so I'm going to move back. So our final thing that we're going to be discussing today is the transaction templates. I mentioned at the beginning of class that there's going to be an option when you're creating transactions that allows you guys to use a specific template. Now, the templates are extremely beneficial because what it's going to allow you to do is, instead of having to manually go through and grab each of the forms that you might need, I can just click on a specific template. It might even automatically choose my type, choose MLS number. Oop. Oh, I shouldn't use an incomplete listing. Leave it at that. So I've got my listing packet. When I hit create, it's not going to automatically fill out any of the details for me or the dates for me. It may end up having some contacts that are in there, which is cool. In my case, there we go, contacts. I've already got myself added as a listing agent. When I move over to forms, you notice that I have a whole bunch of forms that are already built into this particular template. Now, some of these might not be things that I actually need. That listing packet, you guys might think, oh, wait, that's not any of the stuff that you would actually want. That I just grabbed some forms and added them. But the principle is, whenever you guys have created a transaction template, it allows you guys to just skip the part where you have to go through and manually add in a bunch of forms. So I can't stress how important this is. Head over to your gear icon over on the left-hand side, and there's going to be a button for transaction templates right here. So immediately to the right of where the gear icon was. Now, creating a transaction template is fairly simple. You just click this add button up at the top. You give it a name. Go. And I'm going to choose vacant land listing. And we'll give it a description if we need to. It's not required. You don't even have to put in the type. I'm going to save that. And I can add in checklists, which allow me to make sure that I stay on topic or stay in the right order of things. We've also got the option to add in contacts, which is fairly simple. If you guys have somebody that needs to be a part of every single transaction, like I know there's a couple offices and teams in town that people don't put in their own listings. Everything gets added under one person's name, which I have mixed feelings about. We also have a section here for documents. You can add in folders so that there's a hierarchy already in place, or you can add in documents as well so that there's company forms or company documents that you add in. And then finally, we also have the forms section. So if there's anything that you needed to add from here, you guys can go in and add in your vacant land form. We can go in and add in all of our oh goodness, I'm so sorry. We're actually almost running. I wondered why my alarm was going off. I was like, why is this letting me know? Anyway, you can add in any of those forms in advance. When you add those forms, again, that template is actually going to allow you to just jump right back into wherever you left those forms off, and you can just start filling them out, get all the rest of the details put in, and you don't have to worry about manually picking each and every one each and every time you create a transaction. All right. That's it for our class today. It's 11 o'clock on the dot. So we're going to leave it at that. If you guys do end up having any questions, I'm going to leave the session running for just a couple minutes here. If we don't have any questions, you guys can leave. But if I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button one last time, I just want to know that everybody's here. I think I just saw somebody leave, but yeah, you don't have to worry about it. If you're leaving, I know you're here because you can hear me. I think Jasmine missed a hand raise earlier. Steph, if you wouldn't mind hitting it as well. I know that you hit yours earlier, but if you guys can hear me, just let me know you're here by hitting that raise hand. Once you do, you guys can split. Thank you guys so much again for joining us today. Really appreciate you guys. being here with us and bearing with us as we kind of slowly transition back into having in-person classes again. Oh yeah, and Sherry, just to make sure I'm understanding what you're referring to, are you talking about on the right-hand side of the transaction templates or transactions? Yeah, okay. So the wizard is going to bring us back to whatever step we left off on in the wizard. The dashboard is going to be actually what page you land on whenever you initially open up a transaction. The details is going to be what you fill out on step 1 and step 2 of the wizard. So the details of the property, the details of the listing information, as well as the dates for that transaction. The contact section gives you guys buyers, sellers, attorneys. I mean, there's a huge variety of different contacts that you'll have access to here. And again, depending on the form that you're going to be using, it may be looking for one specific name. Also, is there a client portal that buyers, sellers can sign into to see things like service orders, home warranty, et cetera? Not for Transaction Desk. They do have a sign-in option to be able to view any of the documents that they've signed, but that's it. And that's also something that they would have to choose to sign up for at the end of the signing process. And we talked already about forms, the signings, the documents. The checklist option, this is something that was at least relatively in beta, but this allows you to actually assign effectively a task to each and every one of the forms or documents or the signing process to ensure that if there's a form that has to be filled out within a certain time frame, that it can actually be filled out properly and within the time that's required. And then additionally, we also have the, take a screenshot real quick. Additionally, we have the tasks option, which is going to be a little bit more explicit for each item within the checklist. There's also call logs where you can actually document each time you spoke with people, service orders that you've put in, history of every single thing that's ever happened within this transaction. I mean, we just started this today. Look at how many entries there are. There's also a home warranty option where you guys can put in a request for those. Title order, marketplace, which they've added, and then there's also a start advertising button that they all added. I mean, all of these last 4 options are actually brand new. They've added those in the last year or so. Yeah. And I guess since you guys are still sticking around, there is also a button up here at the top. If you guys would like to add documents, instead of downloading it to your computer and then uploading it again when it's just been sent to you by email, there's an email address specific to this transaction that's going to be added up here at the top of the page with that little email icon. You guys can just forward the email to this address and any of the attachments will automatically be turned into documents. There's even an option here to download a contact card for each transaction you create. So instead of having to receive the email, jump in a transaction desk, get the email address, go back into your email, forward it to that email address, you'll have a contact card for each transaction, which is kind of handy. I don't know that too many people use that, but also if you guys are sticking around on the recording side of things, if you do need to delete any of the transaction that you created, so if you guys did actually create a test transaction, there's a delete button right here as well. So you guys can actually just delete that transaction if you need to. Or if you guys started a transaction without a template, you guys went back and created a template for yourself, you can even apply that template or create one from a transaction you've already made. Lots of cool options. Anyway, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. But if you guys do have any problems, questions, issues at all, get in contact with us over at the service desk. We've got our phone number on the screen here. There's also an email address as well. You guys can email us at any time. So even if we're not available on the phones at the moment, you can always send us an email and we'll have somebody checking those on a pretty regular basis. Just don't expect to hear back from us too quickly if you email us at 9 o'clock on a Saturday. We're located at 41st and Garnett. Actually, on our association homepage, so tulsarealtors.com, we actually have our PO box and our physical address if you need it. Yeah, no problem at all. All right. Have a good one. See you later. Stay safe out there.